I used to believe my marriage was built on something unshakable, something pure and honest, the kind of bond you could lean on when the world felt too heavy to carry alone. But somewhere along the way, the ground beneath us began to shift, almost too quietly for me to notice at first, until the small tremors turned into cracks that spread across everything we had created together. Ethan and I had been married for 6 years, and in the early days, there was nothing I wouldn't have done for him, because he had this way of making me feel like I was the only woman in the room, like I was his anchor in a world full of storms. And for a while, I truly thought that kind of devotion was mutual. But over time, I began to feel something changing, something slipping through the spaces of our daily lives, though I couldn't yet put a name to it. It started with the little things. The way he smiled at his phone when he thought I wasn't looking. The way his conversations grew shorter with me, but seemed to stretch endlessly when he was texting someone else. The way he suddenly began working late on projects he'd never mentioned before, leaving me alone at our dinner table with cold food and unanswered questions. And though my heart wanted to believe him, my gut whispered a warning I was too afraid to hear. I remember one evening vividly. We were at a friend's dinner party, the kind of casual gathering where laughter floats around the room and glasses clink with every joke, and I had spent the whole day looking forward to it because I thought maybe, just maybe, it would give us a chance to reconnect, to remember what it felt like to be partners instead of two strangers occupying the same space. But as I watched Ethan across the table, leaning in closer to a woman I barely knew, his face lit up in a way it hadn't been for me in months. My stomach twisted into knots. I froze in my seat, forcing a smile to mask the storm raging inside me as he scribbled something on a napkin and slid it toward her. And she laughed, her fingers brushing his in a way that felt far too familiar for my comfort. And though the room around me buzzed with chatter, my ears rang with silence, like the world had suddenly gone mute except for the pounding of my own heart. Because in that moment I knew I wasn't imagining it anymore. I wasn't being paranoid or insecure. I was watching the truth unfold right in front of me, and it broke something inside me in a way I can't fully explain. When I confronted him later that night, my voice shaking, my hands gripping the counter as if it could hold me upright, he rolled his eyes and said the words that would haunt me for weeks to come. "Don't be dramatic. It's just flirting," dismissing my pain as though it were a trivial inconvenience, a small stain on the fabric of his evening. And in that single sentence, everything became clear. Because it wasn't just about flirting. It wasn't about a napkin or a phone number. It was about respect, about the way he could so easily disregard my feelings and gaslight me into thinking I was crazy for caring. That night I lay in bed beside him, staring at the ceiling, my chest heavy with an ache I couldn't shake, wondering when exactly we had shifted from being lovers to strangers, from partners to opponents. And I realized that if he could so casually throw away my trust and then mock me for noticing, then maybe I had been blind to who he truly was all along. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that maybe I was indeed overreacting, but the image of his smile directed at someone else replayed over and over in my mind, searing itself into my memory like a cruel reminder of everything I was losing. And as the days stretched on, those little cracks in our marriage grew wider. The late nights at work became more frequent, the secretive texts more constant, the excuses more polished. And though I wanted desperately to hold on to us, to fight for the love I thought we still had, deep down I knew I was grasping at smoke, chasing something that had already slipped through my fingers. Still, I stayed because walking away from the man you built your life around isn't easy. Because sometimes love is a cage we lock ourselves into, convincing ourselves that maybe tomorrow will be different. Maybe he'll come back to me. Maybe he'll look at me the way he once did. But every time I reached for him, I felt the distance grow. Every time I tried to speak, my words seemed to dissolve into the silence between us. And I wondered if he even noticed the woman lying beside him anymore. I tried to convince myself to ignore the signs, to cling to the scraps of affection he occasionally threw my way. But deep down, my heart was already bracing itself for the truth I didn't want to face. That the man I loved was slipping away, not because love had died, but because he had chosen to give the best of himself to someone else, leaving me with nothing but hollow reassurances and empty promises. And though I hadn't yet admitted it out loud, that night at the dinner party marked the beginning of the end. The moment I understood that what I thought was unshakable could crumble, and that sometimes betrayal doesn't arrive with fireworks or explosions, but with a smile, a laugh, and a napkin passed quietly across a table, while the world keeps spinning as if nothing has changed. Even though for me, everything had. The days that followed were like living in a haze, a fog thick with half-truths, excuses, and the sharp sting of my own denial. Because even as Ethan assured me that I was imagining things, that I was blowing harmless interactions out of proportion, my instincts screamed louder with every passing moment that I wasn't crazy. I wasn't dramatic. I wasn't insecure. I was simply seeing the truth he wanted me to ignore. And though part of me wished I could just swallow my doubts and carry on, the other part of me, quiet, steady, relentless, refused to be silenced. I began noticing patterns I had overlooked before. The way his phone never left his hand, even when he went to the bathroom. The way he would step outside to take certain calls, lowering his voice as if even the walls of our home couldn't be trusted. And how suddenly, business trips seemed to spring up out of nowhere. Meetings in cities he never used to visit. Overnight stays that left me staring at the empty side of the bed. The sheets cold where his body should have been. And as much as I wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt, the evidence was mounting in ways I couldn't ignore. One evening, as I folded his laundry, I found a receipt crumpled in the pocket of his jacket. A receipt for an expensive dinner for two at a restaurant we had once dreamed of visiting together, but never could justify because of the cost. Yet there it was, proof that he had gone without me, and the pit in my stomach widened when I saw the date. It had been the same night he claimed to be stuck at the office working late. And though I could have confronted him then and there, demanded an explanation, I realized that confronting him with one piece of evidence would only invite another lie, another smooth dismissal designed to make me doubt myself. So instead, I began quietly collecting every scrap of proof I could find, like a detective in my own life. I started taking photos of receipts, forwarding suspicious emails to a secret account, screenshotting text messages I glimpsed when his phone lit up on the counter before he snatched it away. And slowly, painfully, the picture grew clearer, painting a reality I could no longer deny, because it wasn't just flirting. It wasn't just innocent. It was betrayal, ongoing and deliberate, crafted with lies so carefully that he must have thought I'd never notice. But I did, and the weight of it pressed against my chest every day like a stone I couldn't shift. Friends began whispering truths they were too afraid to speak outright, subtle warnings wrapped in concerned glances, the kind of half-confessions that suggested they had seen him, too close to another woman at a bar, his hand lingering too long on her arm, his laughter carrying the tone of intimacy reserved for lovers, not strangers. And though they never said the words plainly, their silences told me enough, filling in the blanks between the receipts and the messages, and the long nights alone. The breaking point came one evening when I returned home early from work, hoping to surprise him with dinner. Maybe find a sliver of the man I had once loved hiding beneath the lies. But as I stepped through the door, I heard his voice in the kitchen, low, urgent, laced with a kind of softness he hadn't used on me in months. And though the words weren't meant for me, they sliced through me like glass when I heard him whisper, "Don't worry, she suspects nothing." And in that moment, the world seemed to tilt on its axis, the air thick and heavy, my knees threatening to give out beneath me because it wasn't suspicion anymore. It wasn't paranoia. It was truth, undeniable and cruel. I stood frozen in the hallway, my hand pressed against the wall to steady myself as his words echoed in my ears. Every beat of my heart pounding with the realization that the man I shared my life with had been lying not just with his actions, but with his entire presence, building a parallel life behind my back. And though pain surged through me like fire, something inside me shifted in that instant, hardening in ways I never expected, because I knew then that I couldn't beg him to love me. I couldn't scream or cry or demand explanations that would only twist into more lies. No, if I gave him the satisfaction of seeing me broken, he would write me off as the hysterical wife, the dramatic woman who couldn't handle the idea of a little fun, and I refused to be cast in that role. Instead, I swallowed the lump in my throat, forcing the tears back, and a calmness settled over me, a clarity sharper than any rage, because I understood what I had to do, not for him, not to change his choices, but for me, to reclaim the dignity he had stolen piece by piece with every lie, every betrayal, every careless dismissal of my feelings. And I vowed then that I would no longer be his victim, no longer the quiet partner holding our broken home together while he laughed in the arms of another, because if he thought flirting was harmless, if he thought betrayal could be brushed aside with a smirk and a shrug, Then it was time he learned the cost of underestimating me. I would give him exactly what he deserved, but it wouldn't be loud. It wouldn't be the cliché of throwing his clothes on the lawn or screaming accusations in front of our neighbors. No, my revenge would be quiet, calculated, final, the kind of justice that strikes not with fury, but with precision, leaving no room for argument, no opportunity for him to twist the story into one where he was the victim and I was the villain. And as I stood there in the silence after his call ended, my heart pounding with both fear and resolve, I knew that the woman I had been, the trusting, forgiving, hopeful wife, was gone, replaced by someone stronger, someone who would not only survive this betrayal, but rise from it with her dignity intact, leaving him to choke on the ashes of what he had so carelessly destroyed. Because sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't in the firestorm of anger, but in the quiet decision to walk away on your own terms, leaving behind nothing but the echo of the words he once used to dismiss me, words I would one day return to him like a dagger. Don't be dramatic. Revenge, I realized, was never going to be about rage or fire or grand gestures meant to humiliate him in front of the world, because those things might have satisfied me in the short term. But they would have left me looking exactly as he always wanted me to look, emotional, unstable, dramatic. And if there was one thing I had learned through the slow unraveling of our marriage, it was that silence and calculation carried more weight than any outburst ever could. So I began to build my plan piece by piece in the same way I had collected the evidence, quietly, carefully, ensuring that when the moment came there would be no escape, no denial, no rewriting of the story to make me the villain. The first step was to meet with a lawyer, a woman who listened to me with calm eyes and a steady voice as I poured out every detail, sliding across the photos of receipts, the screenshots of text messages, the dates and times that painted a map of his betrayal. And she nodded slowly, telling me I had more than enough to file for divorce on grounds that would leave him exposed and empty. And when she explained how I could protect my assets, how I could quietly separate my finances and redirect my paycheck into an account he didn't know existed, I felt the first glimmer of power return to me, like a flame rekindled in the ashes of what he thought he had destroyed. For weeks I played my part, the dutiful wife, smiling when he walked through the door, pretending not to notice the scent of perfume on his clothes, or the way his phone seemed to vibrate with messages he couldn't wait to read. And while he believed I was oblivious, I was moving pieces into place, preparing papers, securing accounts, reclaiming everything he had tried to strip away from me with his lies. And with every secret step I took, I felt stronger, freer, less the woman he thought he could manipulate, and more the woman who was ready to end this on her own terms. The night I chose for the reveal was deliberate, almost poetic, because if he could hand out his number at a dinner party with a smile, I could hand him his ruin over dinner with the same calmness. And so I cooked his favorite meal, the one he used to beg me to make in the early days of our marriage, when things were still tender and new and I set the table the way he liked. Candles lit, wine breathing, music soft in the background, because I wanted him to feel safe, comfortable, unprepared for the storm that was about to crash over him. When he walked through the door, he kissed my cheek absently, his eyes already drifting to his phone as if whatever message awaited him there mattered more than the wife standing in front of him. And I felt a flicker of bitterness rise, but I swallowed it. Because the satisfaction was not in anger, but in the anticipation of what I knew was coming. And as we sat down to eat, I listened to him talk casually about work, about his so-called meetings, and I nodded, letting him believe for one last time that I was the woman who would swallow his lies without question, until finally, as he reached for his glass of wine, I slid the thick folder across the table, my heart steady, my voice calm as I echoed back the words he had once thrown at me like a knife. Don't be dramatic. It's just divorce. For a moment, he didn't move, his eyes flicking from my face to the folder and back again, confusion clouding his features until he opened it and began to flip through the pages, the photos, the screenshots, the receipts, each one a nail in the coffin of the story he had so carefully crafted. And as the color drained from his face, I felt no pity, only a strange, profound relief, as if I had finally set down a burden I had carried for far too long. He stammered at first, trying to form excuses, explanations, reaching for the same old tactics of denial and dismissal, but the words died in his throat as he realized there was no space left for lies, no wiggle room to twist the truth into something palatable, because I had gathered it all, laid it out in black and white, undeniable, irrefutable, and for the first time since I had begun to suspect, I watched him shrink under the weight of his own actions. Stripped of the arrogance he had worn like armor, I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I didn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me broken. I simply stood, took my glass of wine in hand, and told him calmly that the papers were filed, that the accounts were separated, that I had already set the wheels in motion and there was nothing he could do to stop it. And as he sputtered, reaching across the table, begging me to talk, to listen, to give him another chance, I felt an extraordinary calm wash over me, because I realized I no longer cared. I no longer wanted his love, his promises, his apologies. I no longer wanted to fix something that had been shattered beyond repair. I wanted my freedom, my dignity, my peace, and I had already taken them back. That night I packed my suitcase, not with anger but with quiet resolve. And as I zipped it shut, I felt lighter than I had in years. Like I was finally walking out of the cage I had locked myself into when I chose to stay with a man who thought my pain was a joke. And as I stepped through the door, leaving him sitting amidst the ruins of his lies, I knew that my revenge was not the folder on the table, not the divorce papers or the financial consequences, but the fact that I was walking away whole, reclaiming myself from the wreckage he had created, leaving him alone to choke on the emptiness of the life he thought he could build on betrayal. In the days that followed, he tried, of course, the late-night calls, the desperate texts, the sudden appearance at my office with flowers and hollow apologies, but I ignored them all, because I knew now what I had refused to admit before, that a man who could laugh at his wife's heartbreak and call it just flirting was never a man worth saving, and no amount of words could undo the choices he had made. The sweetest revenge, I realized, was not in his suffering, though I knew he felt the sting of his loss, but in my freedom, in the life I was about to build without him, a life where I no longer had to question my worth or beg for respect, a life where I could stand tall and unbroken, carrying with me the lesson etched into my heart by his betrayal. That flirting might be innocent to some, but betrayal is never small. It destroys more than trust. It destroys the illusion of love. And the only way to truly win is to walk away without looking back, leaving behind nothing but the echo of your footsteps and the silence of a door closing forever.